Hey guys, light the candles and close the windows. Yes, it's the weird atmosphere of the bacteria culture dish in the medieval clinic. Today we are not talking about the knights and princesses in fairy tales, but the hardcore treatments in European history that make modern medical students kneel down and shout, "Help!" Friendly reminder. After watching this video, you will definitely want to kowtow to your medicine box at home. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and tell me which treatment you want to try most in the comment area. Imagine this scene. You are a medieval miracle doctor, and the patient comes to you with a wound that is bleeding. You touch your beard and smile mysteriously. Bloodletting therapy? Cure all diseases. Then you take out a scalpel from your pocket that is rustier than a butcher's knife. In medieval Europe, medical practice is more like a terrifying survival game. Originated from the theory of humor theory in ancient Greece, Hippocrates, known as the father of medicine, proposed the humor theory, believing that the human body is composed of 4 body fluids. This was originally a simple medical conjecture, but in medieval Europe, it was developed into a massive medical carnival by doctors. No matter what symptoms the patient has, the doctor's treatment plan is always surprisingly consistent. Bloodletting. Headaches need bloodletting, fevers need bloodletting, and even broken hearts need bloodletting. After all, if you lose too much blood, you really can't feel the heartache. Imagine the diagnosis and treatment scene in the Middle Ages. A pale woman walked into the clinic and complained about insomnia and dreaminess. "Bloodlet," the doctor announced without hesitation, and then took out a rusty lancet. In the next room, a young man was crying bitterly for a broken heart. "Bloodlet." The same diagnosis sounded again. After all, if you lose too much blood, you can't feel the heartache. This may be the earliest emotional anesthesia. Doctors believe that the weakness caused by blood loss can relieve the pain of the soul. This seemingly absurd theory reached its peak during the Black Death in the 14th century, when clinics across Europe became veritable bloodletting factories. Doctors at the time developed a variety of jaw-dropping bloodletting techniques. The most common was to use a special lancet to directly cut the vein, but even more disturbing was leech therapy. In the European court medical archives of the 15th century, leech therapy was revered as the supreme therapy of liquid scalpel. The royal doctors of the Valois dynasty in France were particularly obsessed with this elegant treatment method, believing that these slippery little creatures could accurately suck away corrupt body fluids. In his 1482 book, Essence of Leech Therapy, court physician Pierre de Saint-Come declared, "Leech is a living surgical instrument given to us by God, and it knows the secrets of the human body better than any iron instrument." Imagine the medical scene at the Château de Verneuil in 1478. The young Count de Montmorency is bedridden with love melancholy. After a consultation, the 12 royal doctors decided to use the royal leech therapy. 30 carefully selected medical leeches were placed in gilded porcelain bowls and presented by special leech attendants. These leeches were specially dieted to ensure that they were in the best state to suck blood. "Put 6 near the heart," the chief royal doctor commanded, "and 4 in the private parts, so that they can better absorb the poison of love." As the leeches greedily attached themselves to the pale skin of the young count, the royal doctors began to record the amount of blood sucked, as carefully as a taster evaluating a wine. "Look how beautifully this one sucks," a royal doctor exclaimed. "The color is bright and the rhythm is even. It must be a top-grade leech from Burgundy." Ironically, this seemingly elegant treatment was extremely cruel. During 3 consecutive days of treatment, Count de Montmorency had nearly 4 liters of blood sucked out, equivalent to emptying 2 large bottles of champagne. When the young man finally stopped breathing on the morning of the 4th day, the royal doctors wrote in the medical record, "The patient's face showed a holy paleness, proving that the toxins were completely expelled." This practice of glorifying murder as a medical achievement shows the darkest side of medieval medicine. If conventional leech therapy is horrifying enough, then the extreme treatment during the Black Death took this madness to a new level. In 1349, the Black Death swept Paris. Royal physician Guillaume de Aurillac invented the whole-body fluid purification therapy. In his medical diary, he recorded in detail the treatment for Prince Philip, Later Philip VI's 200 leeches were placed simultaneously on various parts of the prince's body, including the nostrils, ear canals, anus, and other private areas. Leech for the anus should be selected from smaller species. De Aurillac noted in his notes, "The skin in this area is more delicate." Even more horrifying is that after the treatment, these leeches full of blood would be collected and placed in a special observation box. The royal doctors believed that the severity of the disease could be determined by observing the death of the leeches. This extreme treatment not only failed to cure any patients, but accelerated their death. Modern medical research shows that massive blood loss can severely weaken the immune system and make patients more susceptible to plague bacteria. Sadly, this theory of fighting poison with poison was regarded as a medical classic at the time, and even formed a complete theoretical system and support network, from royal doctors to specialized leech farms to craftsmen who made exquisite leech containers. Leech therapy reached an unprecedented level of sophistication during the Tudor period. Thomas Vicary, court physician to Henry VIII, developed leech therapy into an art. In his 1536 book, The Perfect Art of Bloodletting, he described in detail the zodiacal leech therapy, the placement of leeches according to the patient's birth sign. Aries patients were to have 7 leeches placed on the right arm, while Pisces patients were to have 12 placed on the ankle. A Tudor medical diary now in the British Museum records the treatment of Queen Anne Boleyn. To cure her melancholy, the royal doctors used silver forceps to precisely place 24 leeches in her jugular veins on new moon nights, the diary states. When the third leech was full and fell off, the queen suddenly laughed, proving that the melancholy fluids were being discharged. These seemingly sophisticated treatments are actually superstition packaged as science. The royal doctors of the Tudor dynasty used high-end theories such as astronomy and astrology to cover up the leech therapy with a gorgeous coat, but they could not cover up the ignorance and cruelty behind it. This practice of refining pseudoscience seems both ridiculous and sad today, but at that time it attracted countless nobles, who even took pride in accepting high-end leech therapy. According to well-preserved medical records, some doctors firmly believed that certain special parts could better absorb toxins. This absurd theory led to many avoidable. The most extreme case occurred in the French court in the 15th century. In the late autumn of 1473, the court of the Duke of Burgundy in France was shrouded in a cloud of sorrow. The 18-year-old noble heir Philibert de Beaujeu was sick with lovesickness and was bedridden all day. Among the royal doctors hired by the Duke at a high price, the chief physician Jacques de Molay was from the Paris Medical School and was an avid believer in the theory of humors. He opened the thick parchment medical book, pointed to the aphorisms of Hippocrates, and said to the worried Duke, "Your son's depression is caused by an excess of black bile, and systematic bloodletting must be performed immediately." On the first day of treatment, Philibert was placed on a gilded bed covered with Venetian velvet. 6 assistants held down his pale hands and feet, and Dr. Mollet personally used a pure silver bloodletting knife to make a cross-shaped incision on the young man's slender wrist. "Observe the blood flow like tasting Bordeaux red wine," the doctor explained to the apprentices. "Look at the dark red flow rate, which proves that the melancholy toxin has indeed been deposited for a long time." The treatment that day lasted 3 hours, and a total of 1.5 liters of blood was released, dyeing a full 12 pieces of Flemish linen red. The next day, the treatment was upgraded to complex leech therapy. 30 medical leeches from Provence were carefully placed in Philibert's temples, groin, and other body fluid hubs. The doctor specifically instructed, the 2 placed in the nostrils must be of small size. This place goes directly to the brain and is most capable of absorbing the melancholy. The young count felt a cold, living thing wriggling in his nasal cavity while his consciousness was blurred. The ultimate purification on the 3rd day was a medical atrocity. The medical team used a special brass blood-drawing device to draw blood directly from the jugular vein. When Philibert's pulse gradually weakened, Dr. Mollet excitedly announced, "Look how clear the last blood that flowed out is, proof that the treatment was completely successful." The final medical records showed that a total of 4.2 liters of blood were extracted in 3 days, equivalent to completely draining the fountain of life from the human body. This medical record, preserved in the Dijon archives, nakedly displays the fatal paradox of medieval medicine. Dr. Mollet wrote complacently in his diary, The patient's face was as holy as an angel when he died, proving that the corrupt body fluids had been completely purified. This kind of writing that glorifies murder as a medical achievement is more frightening than a bloodletting knife. Modern medicine calculates that when the amount of blood loss exceeds 30%, it will cause shock, and Philibert's blood loss was as high as 60%, which was actually a slow death sentence that lasted for 3 days. If the bloodletting in the palace still had some hypocritical elegance, then the national purification movement during the Black Death pushed this medical violence to madness. In 1349, doctors in the Avignon Church invented a hell-level purification therapy. When treating Cardinal de Castelnau, 200 leeches were put into his rectum at the same time. "The anus is a source of toxins," declared the chief plague doctor. "It must be thoroughly cleaned with large leeches from Hungary." At the treatment site, assistants tied the tails of the leeches with silver chains, controlling the depth of these living purifiers like fishing. Even more horrifying is the 7 orifices permeation therapy. In a mural in a monastery in Provence, this treatment is described in detail. The patient is fixed on a special chair, and the doctor fills his ears, nose, and throat with eel-like leeches. Make sure the purification channel is fully unblocked. A medical manual noted, "Pay special attention to placing microleeches in the fornix of the eyeball." These images make modern viewers wonder, is this a medical act or some kind of dark ritual? These atrocities under the banner of science are actually a concentrated outbreak of collective hysteria in medieval medicine. When the Black Death devoured 1/3 of Europe's population, desperate doctors twisted Hippocrates' theory into a self-deceiving life-saving straw. Modern bacteriology has confirmed that anticoagulants in leech saliva will accelerate the spread of plague bacteria. In the age of medical ignorance, bloodletting was like a collective hysteria that lasted for 1,000 years. Medieval doctors stubbornly wielded lancets, believing that as long as they released corrupted blood, they could cure all diseases, from headaches and fevers to mental disorders. However, what is even more surprising is that even in the 18th century, known as the Age of Reason, this absurd theory was still popular in European courts. The nobles at that time regarded bloodletting as a holy book of health preservation, and Madame Pompadour, the favorite concubine of Louis XV, was the most fanatical believer. This court lady, who was famous for her beauty, not only spent a lot of money to raise a special leech care technician, but also performed beauty bloodletting regularly, believing that the loss of bright red blood could exchange for the eternal beauty of the skin. From the dark clinic of the monastery to the gilded bedroom of the Palace of Versailles, bloodletting has completed the strange transformation from a medical method to an aristocratic fashion. When the civilians looked pale and weak due to excessive blood loss, the nobles were eager for this morbid pale skin color. This may be the most ironic medical wonder in human history. Medieval doctors were stubborn because of ignorance, while the nobles of the Enlightenment era were crazy because of vanity. A bloodletting knife cut open the common ignorance of the two eras. If bloodletting shows the stubbornness of medieval doctors, then their surgical operations completely expose the barbarity of the medical system. When branding irons replaced scalpels and drunks became anesthetic samples, the operating room in the Middle Ages became a place more terrifying than the battlefield. In October 1415, the battlefield of Agincourt in northern France was soaked by autumn rain and turned into a quagmire, but the muddy land was far less dirty than the operating table of Thomas Bradshaw, an English military doctor. This former London butcher, now holding the title of Royal Surgeon, was treating the wounded with the same method as he treated sick pigs. His medical qualifications? He had helped knights cut arrowheads with a kitchen knife on the front line of the 100 Years' War and wiped his bloody hands with an apron. The battlefield medicine in the Middle Ages was essentially the art of superimposing injuries. Doctors firmly believed that wound corruption was caused by the devil's breath, and the only way to fight against it was more extreme violence: burning with branding irons, pouring with boiling oil, and soaking in urine. The most authoritative military medical manual at that time solemnly suggested, if the wounded screams too loudly, you can hit their heads until they are unconscious, so as to facilitate the operation. This medical skill that transplanted the logic of the slaughterhouse to the battlefield made the survival rate of the wounded lower than that during the charge. Bradshaw's operating room was set up next to the bodies of 3 French cavalrymen. This was to use the arc of rigor mortis as a natural operating table. In his instrument box lay a few rusty pliers, a can of green-haired lard, and the main tools, 3 irons burned white in the campfire. The temperature must be high enough to seal the devil's exit, he explained to the apprentice while sharpening the knife, completely unaware that the other party was secretly stuffing the saint's amulet into his gloves. When the archer with an arrow stuck in his abdomen was carried in, Bradshaw was as excited as seeing a lamb to be slaughtered. "Hold it! Don't let him move!" He picked up the branding iron and pressed it directly on the wound. The flesh instantly curled up into charred gullies, and the air was filled with a mixture of roasted meat and rancid white smoke. The archer's screams scared away the crows in the tree, and the military doctor commented intoxicatedly, "Look at this perfect carbonized layer." Chapter 7 of the Military Medical Manual says that black is the color of health. When the hot rosin was poured into the wound, the archer finally stopped struggling. His nerve endings collectively chose to go on strike. Bradshaw smoothed the resin with a wooden spoon, like sealing the edge of a pie. Now even Satan can't get in. The remains of Agincourt unearthed in 2012 confirmed the destructiveness of this treatment. The cross-section of a skeleton's leg bone showed that it had been poured with tar at least 5 times, and the archaeologist complained, "This person's leg has become a medieval rosin violin." Finally, the assistant bandaged the wound with a hemp rope soaked in urine. At that time, people believed that urine could exorcise evil spirits, but the actual effect was to make the already festering tissues necrotize faster. 3 days later, the archer died of sepsis. The nonsense he said with a high fever before his death, "Please stop pouring rosin," was solemnly recorded by the military doctor as testimony of demon possession. The tragedy of medieval medicine is that it treats symbolic logic as science. Black wound equals successful disinfection? This is as absurd as thinking that the gallows can treat cervical spondylosis. At that time, medical professors in universities were still arguing about whether pus from the wound means that angels are detoxifying, while Bradshaw's on the battlefield had already given a simple and crude answer with a branding iron. As long as the burn is strong enough, even living tissue will be as quiet as dead tissue. Archaeological data show that England suffered about 400 casualties in the Battle of Agincourt, but the mortality rate in field hospitals was as high as 70%. This means that the probability of you being carried into the tent is more dangerous than being hacked to death by French cavalry. No wonder some soldiers wrote in their wills, "If I'm injured, please give me another stab wound. Don't send me to see a military doctor." The ghost of this barbecue therapy has not yet dissipated. In the 19th century, doctors used mercury vapor to disinfect syphilis patients and lobotomy surgery in the early 20th century. The progress of medical history is often built on the corpses of countless Bradshaw mistakes. When we see those rusty irons in the museum, we should not only laugh at the ignorance of the Middle Ages, but also be alert to whether the modern version of rosin therapy is making a comeback in the guise of technology. In 2015, at the 600th anniversary of the Battle of Agincourt, someone cosplayed as Bradshaw, a military doctor. When the actor used grilled sausages to simulate the iron treatment, the tourists laughed. This may be the most appropriate summary of that period of history. When cruelty is absurd enough, even pain will become black humor. If the branding iron therapy is horrifying enough, then the anesthesia technology of the Middle Ages makes modern anesthesiologists want to poke their own eyes out. In the era without anesthetics, surgery was a torture. In the cold operating room of Santa Maria Hospital in Milan, the layers of blood stains on the oak operating table have turned dark brown, exuding a sweet and greasy smell of corruption. On this morning in October 1386, Surgeon Giovanni De Luca was wiping his most cherished tool with vinegar, a walnut stick wrapped in lambskin, with a carefully carved statue of the healing Saint Damien on the top. This holy beating stick, worth 3 florins of gold coins, was about to play a key role in another bloody amputation operation. For burly assistants pressed Baker Antonio on the operating table and blindfolded him with a cloth soaked in inferior wine. Antonio, 30, was sent for treatment for gangrene in his left leg. When he saw the various bone saws hanging on the wall, he began to struggle desperately. "Hold him down!" Dr. De Luca raised a wooden stick and hit him hard on the temple. Modern research shows that this stick anesthesia can produce an impact force of about 90 G, but it often takes multiple consecutive hits to achieve an ideal coma. The archives of the Milan Medical School recorded Antonio's tragic experience. When the saw touched the fibula, the patient suddenly opened his eyes wide, let out a howl that was not like a human voice, and watched his leg bones shatter under the saw teeth. The archives of the Republic of Venice preserve another more absurd operation record in 1447. The wealthy businessman Marco Barbaro was forced to drink 6 bottles of Tuscan red wine before undergoing amputation. As a result, as soon as the operation began, the blood vessels dilated by alcohol caused arterial blood to spray 3.2 meters away. The scene was like the Trevi Fountain in Rome, and in turn wrote in a letter, except that it was gushing out the fluid of life. The surgeon regarded this disaster as a miracle, solemnly recording, "The blood adorned the Virgin's robe like rubies, which must be God's approval of our operation." These absurd medical practices originated from the ridiculous theoretical basis of medieval medicine. The textbook of the medical school of the University of Paris wrote, "Pain is the whip of the devil, and coma is the comfort of the angel." The mural Ideal Surgery at the Medical School of Padua vividly shows this cognitive confusion. The angel holds the doctor's hand to perform the operation, while the devil screams in the patient's ear. In the Venetian painter Carpaccio's Cure of the Madman, the doctor's posture of holding a wooden stick high looks like an executioner. Another alternative is alcohol anesthesia, but drunk patients often bleed profusely at the operation site due to high blood pressure. In the operating room of San Giovanni Hospital in Venice, on a rainy day in 1447, doctors were preparing a special preoperative ceremony for the wealthy businessman Marco Barbaro. 6 bottles of Tuscan red wine were neatly arranged on the oak table, and the deep red wine flickered ominously under the candlelight. "Drink it. It's a gift from God." The surgeon handed the wine glass to the patient's lips, with a solemn expression on his face when the priest was preaching. This alcohol anesthesia method originated from the magical belief of medieval medicine in wine. The most authoritative Salerno medical canon at the time claimed, "Red wine is the tears of angels and can soothe all pain," but reality is often much crueler than theory. When Marco drank the 3rd bottle, his face had turned from pale to flushed, and his eyes began to blur. "It's time to start," the doctor announced with satisfaction, and at the same time picked up the amputation saw that flashed with cold light. The moment the scalpel cut open the skin, something unexpected happened. Because alcohol dilates blood vessels, the severed brachial artery suddenly spurted out a column of blood more than 3 meters high, dyeing the snow-white surgical towel scarlet. In turn, Paul later wrote in his diary, "The scene was like opening the gates of hell. Blood gushed to the ceiling like a fountain, and even splashed on the statue of the Virgin on the wall." Even more ironic is that the surgeon regarded this accident as a miracle, and solemnly wrote in the operation record, "The blood adorned the Virgin's robe like rubies, and it must be God's blessing for this operation." The account books found by archaeologists at the ruins of the ancient hospital in Venice show that the amount of red wine consumed in such operations was astonishing. In 1450 alone, the San Giovanni Hospital purchased 1,200 barrels of wine, 2/3 of which were used for preoperative preparation. On the murals of the Florence Medical School, a creepy scene is still preserved. Drunk patients are tied to the operating table, doctors stand in a pool of blood to operate, and angels and demons hover on the roof. This is perhaps the most vivid interpretation of the alcohol anesthesia. In the Middle Ages, when medicine and superstition are entangled, the so-called treatment is often more dangerous than the disease itself. These so-called anesthesia techniques are actually medical performances that ritualize violence. Modern medical research shows that coma caused by hitting the temple is very likely to be accompanied by concussion or intracranial hemorrhage, and alcohol inhibits coagulation function. Sadly, this absurd anesthesia tradition has continued for 5 centuries. Archaeologists can still find beautifully decorated anesthesia sticks in the surgical instrument sets of the 18th century. If physical anesthesia is a disaster, then the medieval pain management program can be called a black comedy. Under the towering dome of San Marco Hospital in Florence, At dawn in late autumn of 1442, a special concert was being prepared. On the stone operating table, the young silk merchant Lorenzo was firmly fixed by a cowhide rope. His bladder stones had tortured him for 3 whole months. Chief surgeon Antonio de' Medici was tuning his instruments, a set of stone-removing instruments that shone with cold light, while the choir children stood uneasily by the side, holding the music sheet. "Remember, my dear child," Dr. Medici stuffed the gilded cross into Lorenzo's sweaty palm. "When the metal enters your body, you must wrap the pain with the melody of the Gloria." In the frescoes on the wall, angels were singing for the martyrs, while the real patients were trembling with fear. The frankincense lit by the nuns lingered in the morning light, casting a sacred veil on the upcoming medical drama. This strange therapy, known as hymn analgesia, originated from the Church's myth of the power of music at that time. The Guide to Medical Hymns, published in 1435, wrote solemnly, "When the notes of the earth resonate with the harmonics of heaven, pain will evaporate like morning dew." The teacher of Dr. Medici, the famous professor of medicine in Bologna, even developed a complete theory, claiming that different surgical sites correspond to different hymn tunes. Psalm 38 is suitable for stone removal, and the melody of lamentation should be used for amputation. When the bell rang to start the operation, the choir sang "Lord, have mercy" in unison. But when the doctor's probe penetrated Lorenzo's urethra, the solemn hymn instantly turned into an inhuman howl. The patient's voice suddenly rose 2 octaves. The recorder hurriedly wrote on the parchment. The timbre was so sharp that 3 novice nuns fainted on the spot, and the children's voice of the choir was completely out of tune. Worse, Lorenzo's struggle caused the probe to slip, cutting a hole in the bladder wall, and blood immediately stained the snow-white surgical sheet red. Faced with this disaster, Dr. Medici showed amazing calmness. He signaled his assistants to increase the volume of their singing, and at the same time shouted, "Your screams will only make the devil happy." According to medical documents at the time, this reaction was not an isolated case. The surgical code of the University of Padua in 1450 clearly stated, "If the patient makes discordant sounds in the chant, it proves that the evil spirit is at work, and at this time, you should insist on singing the whole song." More scientific pain management comes from the medical school of Oxford University. In the cellar laboratory of Oxford University in 1448, the successors of Professor of Medicine Roger Bacon were brewing a pot of pain-relieving holy medicine with strange green bubbles. The parchment formula had a disturbing list of ingredients: 3 ounces of unripe poppy fruit pulp, 2 pennies of poison hemlock extract, the back skin of a live toad, and, to add holy power, a little consecrated wine stolen from the monstrance. "Remember, collect toads during the waning moon," Chief Pharmacist John de Westminster stressed to his apprentices. "Their poison is the mildest at this time." In the iron cage in the corner of the laboratory, a dozen toads were throbbing their throats without knowing that a disaster was about to happen. On the anatomical diagram hanging on the wall, the pain nerves of the human body were labeled as the devil's strings, and they believed that their potions could pluck these evil strings. A treatment record from 1453 preserved in the Oxford Library recorded the disastrous debut of this pain-relieving syrup. Blacksmith William Hodge was fed a full mug of potion before amputation, and what happened next is horrifying. After taking the medicine, the patient first laughed strangely, and then began to talk to invisible spirits. When the saw touched his leg bone, he suddenly screamed that the devils of hell were piercing his soul with flaming spears. The most horrifying thing is that during the entire operation, his eyeballs kept rolling up, revealing a large area of white, as if he was really staring at a terrifying dimension invisible to mortals. What's even more ironic is that this analgesia that pushed patients into a hallucination hell was actually regarded as a medical advancement at the time. Emma Thompson, professor of medical history at Cambridge University, pointed out, medical doctors in the Middle Ages actually accidentally discovered the anesthetic properties of certain substances, but because they had no idea about dosage control, they turned analgesia into hallucination. Modern pharmacological analysis shows that the morphine content in poppy juice is less than 0.1%, while the hallucinogenic doses of coniine and toad toxin are seriously exceeded. In the underground archives of York Minster, there is a heartbreaking confession letter. An anonymous doctor wrote, "After I gave the bishop analgesic yesterday, he claimed to see the Virgin Mary dancing in the operating basin. Have I committed blasphemy?" This cognitive dissonance between religion and science typically reflects the dilemma of medieval medicine. In the display cabinet of the Wellcome Museum in London, the last batch of samples of this analgesic syrup are displayed in several sealed glass tubes. The dark green liquid has condensed into a gel. The interactive screen next to it simulates the effect of the drug. Visitors can see distorted surgical instruments, talking crows, and miniature demons crawling out of wounds. This display full of black humor may be the most appropriate annotation of that period of history. These seemingly absurd attempts to relieve pain reflect the most profound paradox of medieval medicine. They want to relieve patients' pain, but are unwilling to give up those treatments that inevitably cause pain. Just like using holy water to cool down a branding iron, this cognitive dissonance eventually evolved into collective hysteria of the entire medical system. When we flip through these yellowed surgical records, the most frightening thing is not the bloody details, but the professional attitude of doctors when recording these atrocities. The diagnostic methods in the Middle Ages are also jaw-dropping. Urine diagnosis doctors will observe the color and taste of urine like tasting wine, and even developed a urine therapy regimen. In the early morning of London in 1599, the urine hall of St. Thomas Hospital had already started a day of diagnosis and treatment. 12 doctors in scarlet robes sat around a long oak table, on which 200 glass urine bottles were neatly arranged, gleaming amber in the morning light. Richard Bannister, the chief urologist, was holding a pure silver stirring rod and demonstrating how to identify the typical characteristics of melancholic urine. Note the swirling sediment, like the whirlpool of the Thames, indicating that the patient has too much black bile in his body. In Venice, the urine diagnosis ceremony was even more luxurious. The Doge's royal physician used a gem-studded Venetian glass urine bottle with fine scale lines engraved on the bottom of the bottle. We need to measure the sedimentation rate of melancholic urine, the Venetian Medical Code records. If it settles to the bottom within 3 recitations of the Hail Mary, it means that the patient is in critical condition. The most exaggerated was the Prague Royal Palace, where Rudolf II's royal medical team would make a color atlas of the emperor's urine, which was drawn on parchment by court painters for archiving. The urine diagnosis course at the Paris Medical School was a wonder of the Renaissance. Students must master the 4 arts of observation, shaking, smelling, and tasting. First observe the color of urine, compared with the 24-color standard color spectrum. Then shake to see how long the foam lasts, timed with an hourglass. Then smell the odor, and finally taste it with the tip of the tongue. The 1601 Paris Urine Diagnosis Manual records in detail 82 descriptions of urine odors, including the melancholy of an autumn orchard, and the shyness of a virgin's first menstruation, and other puzzling poetic expressions. Urine diagnosticians in England even developed a complex taste system. The 1610 medical records preserved by Cambridge University show that the urine of a certain earl was described as sweet and greasy honey first, then the fishy and astringent rust, and the aftertaste was sour and bitter with sin. Even more ridiculous is that doctors believe that the patient's mental state can be judged by the taste of urine. A bishop's urine was sent to the Inquisition because it was full of the bitterness of heresy. The Golden Urinal Clinic under London Bridge was the most successful medical startup project at the time. The proprietress Margaret Clifford invented a complete urine industry chain, raising 50 urine girls who wore white gauze skirts and had a strictly controlled diet. They had to drink 3 liters of milk every day, building a constant temperature cellar to store urine, and even developing virgin urine derivatives, a standard package of 3 shillings per pint, a Menarche special brew of 5 shillings, and a sky-high Ramadan holy urine. In Rome, the Pope's urine diagnosis business was even more amazing. There was a special holy urine shop under the Sistine Chapel, where priests used gold-plated funnels to collect the Pope's urine and made it into holy urine amulets for sale. The account book in 1605 showed that this urine mixed with gold powder was sold for as high as 10 gold ducats per ounce, and it was still in short supply. The most ironic thing is that many popes actually suffered from diabetes, and the reason why their holy urine was so popular was entirely because of the special sweetness caused by the high sugar content. Modern biochemistry has completely exposed the absurdity of urine diagnosis. There is no correspondence between urine composition and specific diseases, and the so-called diagnosis is completely taken for granted. The Cambridge University Laboratory once used a spectrometer to analyze the plague urine recorded in the Middle Ages and found that its color change actually came from the metal oxidation of the storage container. Even more ridiculous is the actual effect of urine therapy. In 1600, a clinic in London openly sold virgin girls' morning urine, claiming that it could treat infertility, and the price was 3 times that of ordinary urine. A noble family letter in 1612 collected by the British Library recorded a heartbreaking scene. The Countess drank virgin urine for 3 consecutive months and not only did not get pregnant, but died of hepatitis. The autopsy showed that the holy urine she bought at a high price actually came from a prostitute with jaundice. If urine diagnosis is still a mild absurdity, then medieval astrological medicine has pushed pseudoscience to a new height. In 1476, the Star Operating Room of the University of Padua Hospital was preparing for an unprecedented amputation operation. The zodiac map accurately reproduced on the ceiling flickered in the candlelight, and the marble star map inlaid on the floor was completely synchronized with the actual astronomical phenomena that night. The chief surgeon, Girolamo Cardano, was wearing a surgical gown embroidered with planetary symbols, and was using a pure silver astrolabe to calculate the best time for surgery. It must be completed during the window period when the moon leaves Scorpio but has not yet entered Sagittarius. His assistants were busy marking the patient's limbs with ribbons of different colors. Red represents the corresponding part of Mars, and blue is under the control of Jupiter. In the private pharmacy of the Medici family in Florence, astrologers were preparing the priceless Saturn pills. According to the 1489 Manual of Celestial Medicine, the following ingredients must be ground into powder when Saturn and Jupiter form a sextile. To meteorite fragments, symbolizing Saturn's coldness and hardness. Air-dried bat wings, corresponding to night. Flour blessed by 3 communions. These ingredients must be ground in a lead mortar, Saturn metal, for a full 7 hours, Saturn numbers, and finally mixed into pills with virgin saliva. Lorenzo de' Medici's medical account book shows that the main effect of this pill, which cost 50 florins each, was to cure depression caused by astrological misalignment, but the actual effect was to cause severe lead poisoning. The royal medical team of King Charles VI of France took astrological medicine to the extreme. They built a rotating star chamber to adjust the king's bed direction every day according to the position of the planets. The medical diary of 1392 recorded a horrifying treatment plan. When Mars and the Moon conjunct, midnight on July 13th, the following treatments were performed. 1. Burn the moon point on the top of your Majesty's head with a branding iron. 2. Make an incision on the left wrist corresponding to the Mercury meridian. 3. Take sun potion mixed with gold powder. What's even crazier is that the royal doctors made a therapeutic mechanical clock that was fully linked to the king's astrolabe, and different medicines would automatically pop out at each hour. Modern medical historians have found that this precision treatment has aggravated the king's schizophrenia, and the onset time of those so-called demon possession coincides exactly with the time of forced medication. In 1492, the birth of Bianca Maria, the Holy Roman Empress, became a classic case of astrological medicine. The midwife team decided based on the astrology. Delivery position, kneeling position required during Leo period. Umbilical cord cutting tools for the baby. Copper scissors are used during Venus period. Gold scissors are used during Jupiter period. First breastfeeding time after delivery. Must wait until the moon forms a trine with the baby's natal star. The result was a dystocia that lasted for 3 days. And finally, a skull-crushing operation had to be performed to remove the dead fetus. The astrologer's conclusion was, because of Saturn's transit, this child should not have survived. This theory that forcibly links the movement of celestial bodies with human health actually reflects the fatal flaws of the medieval cognitive system. Modern medical research shows that the so-called astrological efficacy at that time was completely a superposition of placebo effect and coincidence. The most ironic thing is that Copernicus's teacher, the famous astronomer Domenico Maria Nevera, was also an avid astrologer. His medical diary was full of absurd records such as Today Mars enters the house of illness. Amputation is suitable. If astrological medicine is crazy enough, then the medieval sympathetic magic therapy completely blurred the boundaries between medicine and magic. In the medical history of Europe in the 14th century, there is no more absurd but more pious medical practice than sympathetic magic therapy. When the shadow of the Black Death shrouded the entire European continent, desperate people created a peculiar medical system that combined Christian beliefs, ancient Greek philosophy, and folk magic. The core idea of this system, the law of similarity, believes that there is a mysterious connection in nature, and similar things will affect each other. This idea, in the hands of medieval doctors, evolved into a medical farce that lasted for hundreds of years. Let's turn our attention to the Paris Medical School in 1348. The young medical student Pierre is copying the latest work of his mentor, the famous medical authority Guy de Chauliac. The parchment clearly stated, "To treat plague abscesses, you need to find a toad with a golden cross pattern on its back and place it on the patient's swollen area on a full moon night." What Pierre didn't know was that his mentor's seemingly authoritative medical advice was actually copied from the notes of a rural wizard. In the medical library of Oxford University, there is a 1350 plague treatment guide. Opening this book bound in fine calfskin, it records a ridiculous treatment plan. If a patient has a lump on his neck, find a live pigeon. Cut open its abdomen and stick it to the affected area. When the pigeon dies, the disease will also go away. What's even more ridiculous is that the borrowing record of this book shows that it was circulated by the most prestigious medical professors at the time. A treatment ceremony in London in 1349 can be called the performance art of medieval medicine. The patient Richard was placed on an oak table covered with linen, and a terrible black lump had appeared under his armpit. Chief physician William held a silver knife and carefully carved the initials of the patient's name, R.D., on the abdomen of a living toad. "Watch it," William said to the students watching. "When this creature dies from absorbing the plague toxin, Mr. Richard will be cured." 3 days later, when the toad finally straightened its legs, Richard had already been buried in a mass grave. And William wrote in the diagnosis and treatment record of the day, "The treatment was partially successful. The toad did absorb some of the toxins, but unfortunately the patient's physique was too weak. In the forests of Bavaria, the tree therapy ceremony is full of primitive religious colors. Farmer Hans, who suffered from lung disease, was brought to a century-old oak tree. The doctor cut his finger with a dagger and smeared the blood on the bark to outline the shape of the lung lobe. When the new bark grows out, the doctor solemnly announced, 'Your lung disease will be cured.' Interestingly, Hans did recover after 3 months, but modern medical historians believe that this is due to the rare rest and nutritional supplements he took during his convalescence. These seemingly absurd treatments actually reflect the theoretical dilemma of medieval medicine. Doctors at the time were trapped between ancient Greek medical theories and Christian doctrines. They dared not question the authority of Hippocrates and Galen, but had to give treatment a religious cloak. As a result, the pattern on the back of the toad became God's code, and the growth of trees was regarded as God's miracle. Modern research has found that the success rate of these sympathetic therapies is pitifully low. A study by the Department of History of Medicine at the University of Cambridge showed that among the 300 verifiable cases of toad therapy, only 4 patients actually recovered, and these 4 people were probably not suffering from the plague at all. Even more ironic is that the account books of these witch doctors are more complete than medical records. The Oxford University Library has a 1352 bill that records in detail the whole process of a doctor charging for toad therapy. If these natural therapies still have a bit of romanticism, then the holy relic medicine that will appear next will completely tear off the last fig leaf of medieval medicine and reveal its greedy and ignorant nature. Under the towering spire of Cologne Cathedral, the holy relic market opens on time every Thursday. The vendors set up tents embroidered with gold thread and display various holy medical items on faded velvet. The air is filled with the smell of incense, sweat, and lies. The devout believers hold their shrunken money bags and shuttle back and forth between the stalls. An old woman with wrinkles on her face is stroking a small piece of true cross sawdust with trembling fingers. The vendor vowed, "Madam, This is the log that nailed the Savior to the cross. It can cure all diseases. In a stall not far away, a nobleman in gorgeous clothes was bargaining. 300 florins? Just for such a small bottle of virgin's milk? He shook his head in shock. The vendor immediately lowered his voice. Your Excellency, this is a genuine product shipped from Constantinople, and there is a personal certification from the Pope at the bottom of the bottle. In fact, this bottle of so-called holy milk is just goat milk mixed with lime, and the Pope's certification was forged by the vendor's nephew using burnt bread. In the corridor of the church, the royal medical team of the Duke of Burgundy is holding a luxurious holy relic therapy demonstration. They designed a set of astonishing treatment plans to treat the Duke's gout. At dawn every day, rinse your mouth with a century-old wine soaked in saint's nails. At noon, stick the affected area on the linen that is said to be the shroud of Christ. After nightfall, wear a gold amulet inlaid with angel tears. The Duke's accountant bit his quill and recorded another astonishing expense in the account book. Last month alone, these holy relic treatments cost the equivalent of a town's annual tax revenue. In the darkest corner of the market, a ragged peasant woman was using her last savings to buy a small piece of holy bone. Her child had a high fever, and the village priest said it was a sign of demonic possession. Take this. The vendor handed her a yellow bone. This is the finger bone of Saint Sebastian. Put it under your child's pillow and it will definitely cure the disease. What the peasant woman didn't know was that this so-called holy bone was actually a chicken bone that the vendor had stolen from his own dining table. As night fell, the market dispersed. The vendors counted their heavy bags and closed their stalls with satisfaction. The vendor selling Milky Virgin Mary was boasting to his colleagues, I sold 3 more bottles today. Those fools can never tell the difference between lime water and holy milk. His companion smiled and replied, My sawdust from the true cross is not bad either. Today a bishop bought 10 pieces and said he would give them to his mistress. The next morning, when the first ray of sunlight shone into the Cologne Cathedral, the devout believers came again. They knelt in front of the altar and prayed for the miraculous healing effect of the holy relic. No one noticed that the bishops behind the altar were whispering and discussing the purchase price of the next batch of holy blood. In the basement of the church, a young priest was mixing new holy blood with red wine and cinnabar, and his boss reminded him, Add more cinnabar this time. The color was not bright enough last time. This is the truth about medieval holy relic medicine. A huge scam woven by greed and ignorance. In this scam, faith became the most valuable commodity, and desperate patients became lambs to be slaughtered. When the light of modern science finally shone into this dark corner, people found that those holy objects that claimed to be able to create miracles were nothing more than shoddy counterfeits and cheap imitations. But sadly, even today, similar scams are still being staged in different forms, but with more exquisite packaging and more attractive rhetoric. When the sacred aura of holy objects was corroded by greed, another more scientific dark therapy was boiling in the alchemist's crucible. In the dark streets of Europe in the 15th century, alchemists' laboratories grew quietly like poisonous mushrooms. These quacks who called themselves natural philosophers found an excellent living soil in Europe after the Black Death. Their signs swayed in the wind, with mysterious symbols painted on them. A circle dotted with stars, entwined with a snake that swallowed its own tail. This symbolizes what they call the universal truth. Everything can be transformed, including disease and health. Walking into the laboratory of Venetian alchemist Marco Visconti is like stepping into a crazy dream. The walls are covered with dried lizards and bats, and skulls stolen from the gallows are piled in the corner. The most eye-catching thing is the huge bronze still, which is now emitting an eerie green smoke. This is the purification of moon dew, Marco explained to the curious visitor. Only dew collected on the night of the new moon has the magical effect of curing epilepsy. In fact, what is boiling in the pot is just rainwater mixed with verdigris. These alchemists' formulas read like the devil's recipes. A 1478 book, Medical Alchemy, records the following panacea formula. Take 3 ounces of unbaptized infant's first urine, add 1 coin of crushed gold and pearl powder, steam distill mercury 7 times. and finally drip 3 drops of virgin's menstrual blood. Take it when Saturn and Jupiter are in conjunction, and it can cure all stubborn diseases. The Medici family archives in Florence preserve a ridiculous medical record. The young Lorenzo de' Medici sought help from the famous alchemist Filippo Borso because of impotence. The prescription prescribed by this master is a work of art. Take honey wine mixed with gold powder in the morning, wrap the affected area with toad skin at noon, bathe in milk mixed with mercury before sunset, and drink wine soaked in unicorn horns, actually narwhal teeth, before going to bed. The result is imaginable. Not only did Lorenzo's condition not improve, but his gums ulcerated and his hands trembled, which are typical symptoms of mercury poisoning. Borso's explanation was full of scientific spirit. This is a normal reaction of toxin excretion, which means that the drug is working. Ironically, the alchemist became famous because of this, and orders were placed 3 years later. In the cellar of the medical school of the University of Paris, professors were conducting a more academic alchemical experiment. They believed that the human body was like a small universe, and diseases were caused by imbalance of elements. Their academic papers were full of such lofty theories. Depression is caused by excess earth elements in the body, which need to be neutralized with mercury, representing water elements. The method is to fumigate the patient in mercury vapor until he begins to salivate and tremble, which is a sign that the treatment is effective. The victims of these scientific therapies are countless. According to the Municipal Archives of Venice, 23 people died of poisoning from the so-called gold potion in 1492 alone. Autopsy reports showed that these unfortunate people had a large amount of metal powder deposited in their stomachs. However, the alchemists attributed these deaths to the patient's constitution is not suitable for advanced treatment. Modern chemical analysis has revealed the truth about these miracle drugs. The main ingredients of the universal antidote are mercury and arsenic. The elixir of life is actually a mixture of lead and sulfur. The love potion is just a low-quality brandy soaked in mandrake roots. Ironically, these absurd experiments accidentally promoted the development of science. The equipment such as distiller and crucible invented by alchemists later became the standard configuration of chemical laboratories. Their obsessive research on material transformation also laid the foundation for modern chemistry. As the historian of science said, "Modern chemistry is a flower blooming from the dung heap of alchemy." When the dawn of the Renaissance shone into Europe, many of these alchemists transformed themselves into respected chemists. They quietly burned their early medical formulas and began to study real science. But those who were killed by their miracle drugs will never see this day. While the Venetian nobles were still spending a fortune on the elixir of life, another more crazy medical method was brewing. In 1348, the shadow of the Black Death enveloped Florence, the cradle of the Renaissance. The streets were filled with the stench of rotting corpses and the breath of despair. In the shadow of death, a group of plague doctors dressed in black robes and wearing bird-beak masks became the most horrifying scenery. These doctors, who claimed to be miasma experts, held silver incense burners and sprayed strong perfumes in the streets and alleys. The beaks of their masks were filled with ambergris, rose petals and camphor, just like a group of ravens flying from hell. Municipal records show that the most popular doctor, Giovanni da Pistoia, charged a sky-high price of 10 florins for each visit. His equipment was luxurious. Silver incense burners engraved with exorcism scriptures, glass perfume bottles imported from Venice, and filters woven with virgin hair. Ironically, the account books showed that the mortality rate of the wealthy families who most often asked him to fumigate had a higher rate than that of the poor, because these enclosed spice environments became the ideal breeding ground for fleas. In the Medici family's palace, a crazy epidemic prevention campaign was taking place. In order to create an absolutely pure environment for the newborn heir Cosimo, the family spent the equivalent of the annual income of a vineyard. The walls were wiped with rose water 3 times a day, lavender sachets were hung in every corner, and the bed curtains were soaked in a mixture of musk and amber. The housekeeper's diary recorded a heartbreaking scene. The young master had a rash all over his body and cried non-stop, but the doctors claimed that the toxins were being discharged and recommended increasing the amount of spices. As a result, The poor child almost died of respiratory failure, but this tragedy was packaged as a case of successful treatment. Meanwhile, in the slums along the Arno River, desperate poor people were trying more sad epidemic prevention methods, collecting spice bags, discarded by the rich and boiling them into epidemic prevention tea, stuffing garlic into the nostrils to cause mucous membrane ulceration, and sleeping in sacks filled with dried flowers with fleas. A widow's will read, "I exchanged all my savings for half an ounce of musk, hoping it would protect my children." However, municipal archives show that her 5 children died one after another within a week, and those life-saving spices, packed in cheap pottery jars, could only be used to cover up the stench of corpses. In this feast of death, Venetian merchants ushered in an unprecedented carnival. Merchant ships loaded with oriental spices sailed into the port in an endless stream, and profiteers took the opportunity to drive up prices. The price of pepper soared 20 times, the price of frankincense was higher than gold, and inferior camphor was sold mixed with sand. The account book of the merchant Marco Rossi recorded the naked fraud. The top frankincense sold to the Medici family was actually mixed with rosin, with a profit of 800%. What's more ironic is that most of these profiteers who made money from the plague survived to the end, because they had been sailing all year round and had long been immune to the plague bacillus. Modern epidemiological research has completely exposed this aromatic scam. Spices are completely ineffective against the plague bacillus, and the closed incense environment has accelerated the spread of the bacteria. The real survivors are the poor who ventilate frequently. When we gaze at the exquisite perfume bottles and bird beak masks in the museum, in addition to lamenting their artistic value, we should remember this bloody lesson. When disaster strikes, the most gorgeous protection is often the most useless, and real epidemic prevention never needs these flashy decorations. As a survivor wrote in his diary, "When death comes knocking on the door, the fragrance of perfume will only make it stay longer." This period of history not only witnessed the fragility of human beings in the face of plague, but also revealed that in the face of crisis, blindness and superstition are often more deadly than the disease itself. The most absurd are some special treatments. In the basement of a Bavarian monastery in 1423, a horrifying holy operation was being performed. The young nun Margaret was tied to an oak chair, and her screams echoed between the stone walls. The attending physician, Brother Heinrich, was holding a bronze chisel and gesturing on her smooth forehead. "The devil is hiding here," he vowed to the other monks who were watching. "Just make a small hole so that the evil spirit can have an exit." This scene was common in the treatment of mental illness in medieval Europe. The authoritative church book, Hammer of Witches, at that time clearly stated, "All lunatics are possessed by evil spirits, and they must be released by breaking their skulls with holy instruments." As a result, a treatment method that combined religious fanaticism with primitive surgery swept the entire Christian world: craniotomy exorcism. Let's take a close look at a typical exorcism operation. The patient will first be fed a sedative made of absinthe and mandrake roots. The actual hallucinogenic effect is far greater than sedation. Then, for strong men, press the patient on a special exorcism chair. This chair has an iron ring to fix the head, and the armrests are engraved with exorcism scriptures. The priest who performed the operation would first draw a cross mark on the scalp with holy water, and then use a silver hammer and a bronze chisel to make a coin-sized round hole in the skull. There was no anesthesia during the whole process, and the patient's screams were relied on to scare the devil. Archaeological discoveries reveal the amazing details of these operations. In 2015, German archaeologists unearthed the remains of a 15th century man in Bavaria. There were 7 holes of different sizes on the skull, and the edges all had signs of healing. This means that this unfortunate soul has undergone at least 7 such treatments, which can be called the medieval version of hole punching master. What's even more ridiculous is that the edges of the holes on some skulls are decorated with exquisite patterns, as if to declare, "Look, our craniotomy is so artistic." The theoretical basis of these operations can be called brain opening. Medical texts at the time recorded, "Depression is caused by the accumulation of black air in the skull, and madness is caused by the evil spirits." A 14th century French doctor even invented the astrological craniotomy method. The location of the hole was determined according to the patient's birth sign: Aries in the left forehead, Gemini in the right parietal bone. His case collection proudly recorded, "A certain countess underwent surgery when Jupiter was on duty, and she said she saw an angel flying out of the hole after the operation." Ironically, this absurd treatment does have a few successful cases. Historical records show that some epilepsy patients did experience some relief after undergoing craniotomy. Modern medicine explains this as a temporary reduction in intracranial pressure. But more often, patients suffer from postoperative infection, brain damage, or die directly on the operating chair. A Venetian doctor's private notes recorded, "Today, I performed an exorcism on a certain businessman. When I chiseled the third time, he suddenly stopped struggling. Later, it was found that the chisel had penetrated too deep into his brain. But his soul was indeed saved." The most outrageous thing about this treatment is the profit chain behind it. Exorcists authorized by the church need to pay a huge licensing fee, and the price of an ordinary iron chisel can increase tenfold after being consecrated by the bishop. The account books that have been preserved to this day show that Brother Jacob, the most famous exorcist in the 15th century, accumulated wealth equivalent to 1 million euros today through craniotomy alone. His account book clearly states, "A noblewoman, depression, craniotomy 3 times, fee 50 florins. Modern neuroscience has completely denied this barbaric treatment. CT scans show that most of the survivors have severe brain damage. In the display cabinets of the London Museum of the History of Medicine, there are various exquisite craniotomy tools: gemstone-encrusted holy bone chisels, skull drills engraved with scriptures, probes wrapped with virgin hair. These gorgeous weapons remind us that when religious fanaticism is dressed in medical cloaks, the harm caused is often more terrible than the disease itself." As medical historian Emma Goldstein said, "Medieval doctors did find a way to release the devil, but the devil was their own ignorance." This period of history not only witnessed the dark period of medicine, but also warned us that any practice of simply attributing complex diseases to supernatural forces is the cruelest betrayal of patients. When craniotomy and exorcism declined, another equally dangerous scientific therapy became the mainstream therapy at the time in the 18th century. In the spring of 1745, a strange smell of tobacco replaced the fragrance of perfume in the Palace of Versailles. Louis XV royal doctors discovered a magical therapy from the New World: rectal fumigation of tobacco to treat everything from gout to depression. The craze for anal fumigation therapy turned the French court into a huge human chimney exhibition hall. Every morning, the royal chief fumigator Dupont would appear in the king's bedroom on time with his silver toolbox. The toolbox was neatly arranged with various exquisite smoking utensils: silver pipes engraved with royal coats of arms, smoke funnels inlaid with gems, and tobacco grinders wrapped in velvet. "Your Majesty," Dupont would salute respectfully, "today we will use the newly arrived Virginia tobacco, which is said to be used by Indian chiefs to enhance masculinity. The treatment process can be called a performance art." Louis XV would recline on a special fumigation couch, and 2 attendants would carefully separate his silk nightgown inlaid with gold thread. Dupont would light the special pipe and insert the slender silver tube into the king's noble anus. "Pay attention to the rhythm of the smoke," he explained to his apprentices. "It should be as elegant and even as playing an organ." When the light blue smoke slowly rose from the king's body, the court musicians would play the specially composed Smoke Exhaust Sonata. Madame Pompadour was a fanatic fan of this treatment. Her private diary recorded in detail the lady's fumigation time, 3 times a week. Today, tobacco mixed with rose essential oil was used. The smoke was lightly scented with flowers. Madame de Montespan praised it as smelling like a spring garden. In fact, the lady's personal maid revealed in her memoirs that the so-called floral smoke was actually the result of spraying a lot of perfume in the room in advance. Ironically, modern medical research shows that the only effect of this treatment is the short-term excitement brought by nicotine absorbed through the rectal mucosa. The 3 existing noble mummies who have undergone this treatment have been found to have serious cancer in the rectum. What's even more ridiculous is that the so-called ancient Indian secret recipe is actually a lie made up by French colonists to promote their overstocked tobacco stocks. This absurd medical fashion eventually vanished with the French Revolution. But the revelation it left us is still relevant. When the stupidity of the powerful meets the greed of businessmen, even the most absurd things can be packaged as noble fashion. As an anonymous satirical poet wrote at the time, "The smoke of Versailles can neither cure diseases nor govern the country. Its only function is to prove that the brains of the nobles are indeed in their buttocks." When the French nobles were still obsessed with anal fumigation, the British gentlemen across the channel were obsessed with another equally weird treatment, using electric eels to treat impotence. In London in 1780, if you saw a well-dressed gentleman with a flushed face and staggering steps walking out of a building with a sign of Neural Fluid Research Institute hanging on his waist, with a subtle smell of burning, then congratulations, you have just witnessed a scientific carnival of the Enlightenment era, a live broadcast of electric eels treating impotence. The protagonist of this farce, Dr. James Graham, a charlatan who was kicked out of the University of Edinburgh, is waving two twisting electric eels and a Leyden jar to sell his bioelectric gospel to the British upper class. His clinic looks like a clumsy theater stage. A gilded electric shock chair is hidden behind the velvet curtain, and the apprentices wear uniforms with imitation lightning patterns, just like a group of pagan priests ready to summon the god of thunder. Whenever the treatment begins, Graham will shout Newton's famous saying, "Action equals reaction," while throwing the slippery electric eel around the patient's waist. The action is like a cook brushing honey on a Christmas turkey. Sir Robert Chesterfield of the East India Company is one of the most devout believers. After marrying his 19-year-old bride, the 53-year-old old gentleman suddenly found that his colonial expansion ability had a serious deficit. Wearing his ancestral silver reproductive protector, he lay on Graham's examination table. When the first electric eel attached to his pale abdomen, the knight screamed like a castrated cat. When the third eel discharged electricity, he began to recite Paradise Lost. The pain produced some kind of sacred illusion, making him mistakenly think it was the touch of an angel's hand, although the clinic apprentice privately revealed that it was just the natural twitching of the eel when defecating. This personal tragedy soon turned into a national carnival. Between 1783 and 1787, the value of electric eels in the Thames skyrocketed, from 3 shillings per pound to 2 guineas, comparable to liquid gold. River pirates swept the riverbed with electrified fishing nets at night, and Parliament urgently passed the Eel Protection Act, not for the ecology, but to ensure the supply of medical resources for the upper class. Graded services appeared on the black market. The 5-star Platinum package, high-quality eels that can discharge electricity on the MP 5 times in a row, and the economical Gentleman's Joystick, defective products that are resold to brothels after discharging once. The most ironic thing is the Electric Eel Beauty Contest, held at Hampton Court Palace. The winning eel was named Your Majesty's Little Sparkle, and was paraded in a gilded fish tank wearing a miniature crown, just like an aquatic royalty. However, all farces cannot escape the absurd ending. In the winter of 1788, 3 top electric eels died collectively while being treated by the Duke of Devonshire. The autopsy showed that Graham had fed them with laudanum to enhance the effect. The code of science could not cover the core of ignorance after all. The bankrupt doctor switched to selling electromagnetic condoms, actually wool socks sewn with copper wire, and his patients collectively suffered from eel post-traumatic stress syndrome. They would cover their crotch involuntarily when they saw the fish market stalls, and clamp their buttocks when they heard the word discharge. The last words of a certain earl before his death were, "Put the Leyden jar away." This electric therapy craze, which lasted for nearly 10 years, eventually left a double legacy in the history of science. On the one hand, it accidentally promoted the study of bioelectricity and provided inspiration for the later voltaic battery. On the other hand, the English slang eel-minded was added to describe those who are cunning and love to seduce. As the Lancet later commented, "Sometimes medical progress needs to go through a ridiculous swamp first." While the French were still using spices to smoke their buttocks, British gentlemen had already used eels from the Thames to turn their vitals into human resistors. This is probably the most bitter irony of the Enlightenment. When the light of reason finally shone into Europe, people used it to electrify their genitals. So everyone, when we look back on this period of history, the most terrifying thing may not be the electric eels and fumigation therapy itself, but the whole society's almost pious blind obedience to pseudoscience sometimes, The most deadly disease is not the plague, but the ridiculous medical skills that are regarded as the truth. Think about it, if you were alive in the 18th century, would you also be one of the gentlemen waiting in line for electric shock? Tell me in the comments section, which treatments in modern medicine do you think will make future generations laugh? Don't forget to like and subscribe. We will reveal more exciting content in the next issue, which will definitely make you feel both painful and enjoyable. Don't miss this absurd party in the history of medicine.